So yeah, as Diana said, I work at CSIRO, the National Science Agency. And for the past 12 years, I've actually worked in the space of strategic foresight, trying to look at the next 10 to 20 years ahead for Australia, about the major shifts that will change the way we live. And we do a lot of work to advise governments and companies on strategy, right from the national level down to local levels. And we have recently done an update of our Global Megatrends report. It was first put out in 2012. It was kept alive since that time. And it was launched again on the 27th of July at the National Press Club in Canberra this year, and has gone far and wide. We counted 20 million views and then stopped counting. That was about 3 weeks into it. So it's gone pretty far around the world. All this uncertainty is possibly good for business. And yeah, I think I wrote in my abstract a quote by two people, by the musician Meat Loaf and also the baseballer Chuck Yogi Berra, who said, "The future ain't what it used to be." And it does feel a bit like our Megatrends report ain't what it used to be either. It's got some good things in it, but there's some challenging sort of realities in this next version. Some of the major shifts are that climate change is no longer a forecast, a possibility. It's a lived reality for a lot of Australians, and the data has shown worse than we thought, sooner than we thought. We spoke a lot about economic change at the global scale in the previous report. And that's correct, but the geopolitical stuff was a footnote at the bottom of it, and it's now somewhat highlighted. Technologies too have shifted a lot. The digital economy has continued to grow and expand, but artificial intelligence has made a big entrance since we last launched this report, and that's also had an effect. So what I want to do today is take you through the journey of the megatrends for the next 20 years. It's an enormous bucket load of data, and we're going to try and leave some time for questions at the end. I'm not a musician, but I love musicians. I think they're fantastic. And I want to try and do my best to give a view of how the world is changing, but relate it to musicians. But before I go into the story, I want to try and explain this concept of a megatrend. And we use an analogy to try and help understand this term. So this here is a picture of a beach in Sydney. You might recognize it as Tamarama Beach if you know your Sydney beaches very well. And in the water there is a rip. Now in the black and white.
You'll need to change. You'll need to share your screen.
I have to share my screen. There we go. And there you go. Is that visible?
Yeah, it's
so,
good.
Yeah. So I was talking that whole time without showing you slides, but there wasn't anything going on in that first bit. So all good. It's always a bit embarrassing when you're in the National Science Agency and you can't use your PowerPoint. So this is Tamarama Beach in Sydney, and in the water there is a rip. Now in the black and white image, you're going to struggle to see that rip. In fact, even in reality at the beach, most of us struggle to see a rip. They're powerful forces. If you're caught in one, and about 2/3 of us as Australians will at some point in our lives be caught in one. If you're visiting Australia too, and you come to the beach, this is something to be very aware of. It's way more deadly than the sharks. If you don't know what's going on, you feel like you're getting dragged down and out to New Zealand, you want to swim super hard against this to get back to shore. That's your instinct, but it won't serve you well, because that'll make you exhausted, and that's what puts your life at risk. You drown if you can drown, because you can't swim against this current. Not even an Olympic swimmer could outswim a strong rip. But you're not completely at its mercy. You want to relax, keep your head above water, go parallel to the waves, accept the fact you're going to go out a long way and it's going to feel pretty terrible. But the waves are your friend and they'll wash you back in. Surfers also love them. They take you out past the white water to the break. So there's a good side, there's an opportunity, but they're also potentially deadly. Now, if I go to the next slide, we see what happens when University of New South Wales researchers put purple dye in the water. We now have a really clear picture of what this rip is, this powerful force. And if I take you down to the beach now, after what I've just told you, and put you in the water and you're caught in this, hopefully your chances are a lot better. Even if you're an average swimmer, your chance is actually really good in a rip if you know what you're doing. So if you keep your head above, you relax, you go parallel to the waves, you'll make it. And if you're a surfer, great. This will take you through the white washout to the break. That's good. So megatrends analysis is when we look at geopolitical, economic, environmental, social, technological, and legal trends, patterns of change that are taking our society and economy, our careers and communities somewhere new. And it's at the convergence of all these trends coming together to create these very powerful forces. We know they're there, but it's hard to really visualize what they are and where they are and how they're acting. And that's what megatrends analysis that I want to share with you tries to do. It takes you from the black and white photo where it's a bit unclear to one where you get a better picture of what this trajectory of change looks like. And I think we also point out that, you know, the analysis is 10 to 20 years on this one. Used to be 20 years, but we sort of tried to have it as close in parts to 10 or some parts of the narrative out to 20 years. It does give you a clearer picture of what that might be. And the mega trend is not the scenario too. They can play out multiple different ways. You can have a great time in the surf here, or you can be drowned. Likewise, in the mega trends that I want to share with you, there's positives and negatives, and there's many different ways they can play out. So this is what we're seeing. So like I said, adapting to a changing climate is the first of the mega trends that we've really elevated. And there is a prioritization thing here in that the science teams we've worked with, economists and social scientists and business analysts too, have put this picture together. But what we can say is it's worse than we thought and sooner than we thought. You might have seen the State of the Environment, State of the Climate report released by CSIRO and the Bureau of Meteorology last Wednesday. It again gave us the sort of data that we don't want, but we know is happening. So there is this urgency around adaptation. Most of the mitigation we do for emissions is super important, but it ain't for us, it's for our children. We need to look at adapting to new realities in the coming 10 years, and there's some urgency here. Floods are highly visible and severe and causing massive loss of property and some loss of life as well. But the heat waves that are coming are the biggest concern, I think, in terms of loss of life, infrastructure damage, the sort of crippling and long enduring extreme heat, which by all, so that's the first of the megatrends. The next one is on leaner, cleaner, greener, about the scarcity of food, water, mineral, energy resources as demand goes up. You know, the Earth's ability to supply what we need is actually really good. There's not a sort of crunch of not enough resources really here, with innovation and intelligence in how we use them. When we've studied global hunger and malnutrition, no one in Africa ever starved due to not enough food out of the place. It's always been armed conflict, corruption. What we're seeing in Ukraine currently took an enormous amount of wheat production off global markets, which is artificial, but has tragically put a lot of people into that status of hunger and malnutrition. Energy features in this one too. There's an enormous increase in electricity demand, but a hell of a lot of innovation is going on in renewables, and renewables now cost way less than coal-fired generation or anything else. There's a CSIRO report on this, called the Gen Cost Report, and you know, you don't need to switch to renewables for any environmental reason, just do it for financial reasons. The only thing is it's a challenging and potentially bumpy ride from where we are to where we want to be. The escalating health imperative is the increasing expenditure on healthcare, which will take an increasingly large bit of your own income, and it will take a larger bit of the national income at the GDP level. This is happening right across OECD countries. United States of America, it's most intense. It'll go from 13% of GDP to 20% of GDP by 2030. In Australia, we go from 10 to 13% over that same time period. A lot of what we pull out here is about lifestyle, chronic illness, and emotional well-being too. There's been a big increase in stress and anxiety and depression during the pandemic. Our mental health deserves a lot more attention than it has in the past. And previously we struggled to determine directionality, but there's been unambiguous increase in stress and anxiety and depression, especially for adolescents in the pandemic. Geopolitical shift tells us the story of the coming 10 years of this uneasy and difficult pathway that especially the Asia Pacific region that we live in is looking to find to a better, more stable future. But there are some risks and uncertainties along that way. The Australian Government Defence White Paper simply says the Indo-Pacific region is amidst the most consequential geopolitical strategic repositioning since World War II. And we can see that happening. And there are issues around supply chains and sovereign capability that are getting highlighted in this one. Diving into digital, the rapidly growing digital and data economy is happening around us. It was already expanding, but COVID-19 massively increased our reliance on digital technologies, teleworking, telehealth, online retail. We think the telework phenomena is associated with changing mobility patterns and settlement patterns across Australia with the rise of the regions. Increasingly autonomous is about the use of artificial intelligence, and I've pulled out of our data sets the use of artificial intelligence by musicians in peer-reviewed publishing, and I'll show you a bit of a graph there on what's happening in the music research area. And then lastly is the all-important human experience factor in this future. We might be just ask people to put mute on. I think I'm getting a bit of background. If someone could just drop mute on. Thank you very much. So the human dimension is the last of it. And this is about the rising importance of the human experience factor in the future, how trust is being formed in the environment we're moving with all this misinformation and malinformation coming to us all the time. It is, I think, that there is this rising unplug desire that a lot of us have, but how much we can unplug is unclear given the dependency we have on all of the technologies that are surrounding us. So let me jump in then to a couple of data points, and we'll try and make sure we got time for questions, but this is going to be a bit like a roller coaster ride through the future of me pulling out key data points about things that are changing with likelihood of having future impacts on us. So in climate, I think one of the data sets comes from here, Cape Grim in northwest Tasmania. There's a similar station in Hawaii. These are called meteorologically significant monitoring stations because they pick up a big chunk of the global atmosphere. So there's one in Tassie, there's also one in Hawaii, and there's a couple others around the world that show roughly this same thing. So since 1980 to now, that is parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And it's pretty clearly directional. You can get more recent data. I've just got it up to June 2022 on this slide. You can go to our own website and just have a look at it and download it. It's similar for methane and likewise with the other monitoring stations. So despite all we're sort of saying about emissions reductions, this is how the world's tracking and has been for some time. I recently saw a presentation from a senior scientist from the Australian Institute of Marine Science, which is getting this award, lifetime award in the National Academy of Sciences. And she showed us a journal paper from 1980 that she'd published on climate change. And she called it out by they'd monitored what was happening with coral reef bleaching and ocean temperature rises, and they had a lot of pretty convincing data at that point. And it struck a lot of us how much this information has been known for so long. And it sort of also caused this highly technical scientific community to start to think about, well, how do humans understand a phenomena like this? Because it's, you're dealing with one part of the system when you talk about the climate monitoring and the modeling. There's a human emotional and cultural response and economic response that we just didn't seem to get into that space very well. So yeah, long-term temperature anomalies of clear and ambiguous directionality. Sudden shocks. This is near where I live, Ivanhoe Dam, which is a major water storage for southeast Queensland. At late February, we thought we were actually going to have water shortage at that red dot there because the predictions were that we were going to face drought. But in 3 days, we ended up there. That's literally the data out of Ivanhoe Dam from SEQ Water, the Water Management Authority, and that is just unknown in our history. So one of the other challenges of climate change is how the historic data don't actually predict all that well where we're headed into the future. Temperatures were the things that the scientists I worked with on this were saying that the really damaging stuff most damaging stuff will be extreme temperatures and heat, chronic long exposure to high temperatures, and also drought, which is not really on the agenda in Australia at the moment because of the current phase we're at. But you can see the shift there from 1960 to 2019 in the colours of our map. But this is the analyses on heat waves keep on coming out this way too, with peak temperatures, number of heat waves, percent days per year with heat waves, and the maximum duration are all forecast. The orange dot is the year 2020. There's historic data from 1980 to there, and then a forecast out to 2100 on these. But some medical researchers from ANU had a look at this and found that the official records of 340 deaths are likely to be underestimating because of the effect of chronic long-term exposure to heat on our bodies through kidney health, cardiovascular health as well. And you can see like some of the effects are pretty profound. stress and anxiety definitely elevate in Western Sydney as we move into the summer because of this phenomenon, especially for people who can't afford air conditioning. But you can see the effect of the urban heat island effect here. Penrith got to be the hottest place on earth for a day, and the car park there is unsurvivable. But around it, the effect of vegetation is huge. And this is something like we're working in Darwin. CSIRO did a collaboration to look at how to, with the government at federal and state levels and local to cool the whole city down, put car parks underground, green it, do all sorts of things that make it livable in higher temperatures. The big thing around droughts and water scarcity is a 16% decline in cooler month rainfall in southwest of Australia since 1970. So a long-term pattern and shift, and you can see there over the last 20 years areas that have had lowest on record. It does actually get wetter up north, but it becomes a bit more volatile and high intensity, and then droughts, but overall wetter. Sydney's also just a recent journal paper by climatologists was published on Sydney data too, and found the intensity of rainfall events going up. Leaner, cleaner, greener is the efficiency of food, water, mineral energy. The amount of food the world wants to eat is going to go up by a lot, 35 to 56%, due to more people and increasing rates of per capita calorie consumption, which is great because this is a lot of humanity escaping malnutrition over the long term. The Ukraine crisis and pandemic has reversed those trends, hopefully not for too long, and it finds its way back to a pathway where no one is starving in the world anymore. That was the trajectory we were on. The world absolutely, even with climate change, has the ability to meet these. So I've worked on this question a bit with colleagues when we examined food price shocks with the FAO, and we looked at, quite a few scientists have looked at the question of can the world feed itself? Overwhelmingly, yes. No problem feeding ourselves. It's more how we distribute it and don't do dumb stuff like ridiculous trade distortions and unnecessary wars. What we're eating is changing too. Protein is an interesting one to look at. It's the most expensive of all the nutrients to create that your body needs. Requires more land, energy, water, and dollars. But we are seeing this incredible rise of different protein sources. Insects is one of them, and CSIRO is working on that. But more near term, we're seeing markets really respond to plant-based proteins, which are produced with much lower water requirements, much lower energy requirements, and much less land requirements, and lower overall, way less emissions. It's looking like there's some health benefits, but I understand there's still some debate on that one from different sides. But I think we're starting to see some evidence of some health benefits too. Electricity consumption is growing twice as fast as energy consumption. The BHP report on megatrends just calls out the electrification megatrend. So we're going to want heaps more electricity, and you can see it rising there over time, and that's likely to continue. And we want that green to cover all the orange, because the green is the renewable bit, and we're already at 25% renewable, and ATSI reckon we can get 50% renewable by 2025, which is way ahead of timetable for what we thought. But it could go as a pretty smooth transition, and we've got all the renewables in place when we turn off the coal-fired power generation, or it could be as bumpy as all hell with rolling outages as well, like we're seeing already occur. The amount of outages in the United States, this is broken up into seasons, how many outages there had, unplanned electric disturbances. I looked at data from 1.8 million customers, Hunter Valley in New South Wales, and saw that the summer months where we get these big increases in outages. And that's one of the things we want to try and protect for is an extreme heat wave in our big cities, Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, but at the same time a power outage when everyone turns on the aircon, because in severe heat that becomes health threatening or life threatening. Metals and demand growth, so increased consumption, like this megatrend's about minerals and metals, that's all increasing, but in particular the ones to call out here are all our rare earths. The next mining boom's happening in Australia, and it's lithium, cobalt, nickel, copper as well, all the stuff we need to make renewable energy, and all the stuff we need to make all the electronics is booming. Plus countries are looking for secure and reliable supply chains. Big need to increase our lithium ion battery recycling. There's some real toxic nasties in lithium ion batteries, but the good news is you can recycle them. You just need an industry to do it. We ain't got that yet in Australia, and a lot of the world doesn't really have that much capacity yet. Landfill is also part of this thing. The escalating health imperative. Pandemic's probably going to get worse. The risk is likely to elevate. underlying drivers of population density, population growth, jet travel, increase the likelihood. But our ability to detect and respond is way better, and our ability to make vaccines is way better. But you can just see the last 20 years have had a bucket load more than the previous 20 years. And that's because of all those underlying drivers of zoonotic. They're all zoonotic illnesses from an animal to a human. And the risk is likely to continue to elevate as we go out into the future, but also antimicrobial drug resistance. You know, it's pretty confronting reality too, in that imagine that chemotherapy or basic surgery is too dangerous to be considered because of the risk of an infection that we can't treat with antibiotics. So this is something that is growing and becoming more significant around the world, particularly as a consequence of the use of antibiotics in livestock production. This really fuels the rate of resistance. And it's going to increase from 131,000 tonnes to 200,000 tonnes in the future. And big differences in the profile between countries, and already worth having a look at the seafood products especially, but all sorts of products you consume, to look at where they're from, because where the antibiotic usage is high, the importation risk of a superbug is higher too. So demographic aging, we go from 15% to 19% over 65. And healthcare budgets, healthcare is taking over a bigger and bigger share of our GDP. It's partly the aging population, but it's also we're just spending more and more on health as a society. America have the highest per capita expenditure on health, but the worst outcomes across the whole of the OECD as well. So it's kind of like a model that you don't want to follow. Diet, exercise, and sleep. Poor patterns of diet, exercise, and sleep continue to drive excess morbidity and mortality. So much of what we've looked at since 2012, it is actually stunning to me how little has changed and how these conditions have worsened. But by the end of today, most Australians have not had their required amount of physical activity. They've been pretty sedentary, and that damages their bodies a lot. There's also just take a walk through a supermarket and you can see how, you know, not close to where it needs to be the food consumption choices are. So and then lastly, sleep. Massive amounts of data coming out, and research has been done since we last did about how critical it is for you to get consistent, good sleep every night. Think about setting your alarm for when you want to go to bed rather than when you want to wake up. Try and get that regular is one of the findings, but all sorts of things about your mental and physical health will be better if you get sleep. And the mental toll of the pandemic has been pretty significant. And this is just one data set, but there's a lot showing us that stress and anxiety and emergency ward presentations for adolescents with eating disorders or anxiety has taken a bolt up. And this is something we really need to look at. And I'm sure music has a really important role here. Geopolitical shifts. You know, Indo-Pacific is in the midst of the most consequential strategic realignment since World War II. That graph just shows percent of GDP going into military spending, and it's likely to be taking some really big jump ups in light of the Ukraine conflict. New technologies are changing the landscape. High-speed, hypersonic, long-range, variable trajectory, high-precision missiles. Missile technology is basically advancing, and the relative shift where the power lies in that is changing. Advanced autonomous systems and artificial intelligence is on the rise, and cyber warfare and information warfare capability is also rising. You know, I was at a presentation from a senior defence official, and their view is we're already in a cyber war. The attacks are so high and prevalent, and from well-funded nation states, that we pretty much are seeing it happen with sort of manipulation and attempts to sort of expose people's private details online, as we've seen in the headlines. But we're actually, you're not seeing a lot of what is currently happening. So cybersecurity is of elevated importance. The other big thing is supply chains and sovereign capability. About 80% of global trade by sea, about a third goes through South China Sea, a lot more for Australia. If it shuts down, comes unnavigable. It's a lot of stuff we can't get, like medicines, which 90% come from India and China mostly, and a bit from the United States. But we don't have the ability to make insulin in Australia, and we almost ran out of Panadol at the beginning of the pandemic. Diving into digital, they used to say data is the new oil. It's a bit like the new asbestos, but in light of Medibank and so forth. But all organizations, and I think all careers are increasingly having to be like data-driven and data science. Like organizations need the ability to acquire, store, protect, analyze, share data, communicate with data, be ethical with data, basically have that data-driven culture. The demand for digital workers is strong. For the past 7 years, digital technology workforce has grown at 2.5% a year compared to the overall labour market at 1.7% a year. The Tech Council, who we work with, look at an increase from about 860,000 workers up to 1.3 million workers. I'm going to point out, though, in the end of this, that it's not all just the hard tech skills that we're seeing grow. Some of the softer skills around the human side of this stuff might be where the growth is strongest. And there's some pretty good studies supporting that. How often do you want to work from home? A third of us want to work all the time from home. A fifth of us never want to work from home. We'd rather be in the office, and then there's a spread. The consequence of this is, I think, sustained now for 2.5 years. We're seeing a bit of a shift and the rise of the regions. You know, places like Docklands in Melbourne have really contracted a lot. Where did they all go? Coastal Victoria mostly, but also up to Sunshine Coast, Brisbane. And we're starting to look at the census to do comparisons of the ratio of place of work to place of residence for different parts of Australia in 2011, 2016, 2021. And we're starting to see that that ratio has changed quite a bit, and that there's a lot more people are working from living somewhere where they don't work, like a long way away. Yeah, so effect on property markets as well. Increasingly automated. Basically, all this is about this explosion of investment, courses on artificial intelligence. And it's worth pointing out, a lot of this is not rocket science or coding. A lot of this is actually, you know, menu-based interfaces. Like my wife's a town planner, and they're not at all sort of technical, but they had this problem of having several thousand statements about a proposed development in Brisbane, and they wanted to work out whether the statements in the community were supportive or against or neutral. And they could have paid a junior planner to sit there for literally months trying to work this one out and go through all these piles of responses, or most of them were emails, or they could feed them into AI. So they got Microsoft Power BI and plugged it into there, did sentiment analysis using natural language processing and put them into the categories, all done in a few seconds. You know, a couple of hours to do the menu interface, but once they had the data set sorted, it was pretty easy, and it was all via a menu interface, no coding required. So our report that we launched at the National Academy of Sciences last week looks at the use of AI across all fields, including the social sciences and humanities. It's expanded most in the physical sciences, but we see really sharp uptick and increased adoption rates in the social sciences and across all the humanities. In science, it's done some pretty amazing things. This ability to predict the shape of a protein from DNA information using the Google DeepMind machine learning approach took us from the grey bars to the orange and red. It's a game changer. The model from Group 427 gave us our structure in half an hour after we'd spent a decade trying everything. Being used in music too. So the field of music is one of 100. We identified 333 fields of research for all fields of knowledge, but we can see, I just this afternoon took the data out for music to see, we have 214 search terms that are give us what AI is, and then we look at whether a paper is talking about those terms enough to be considered using AI. So it's all automated because we couldn't read this many papers. But music's a fairly small field compared to some of the other really large ones, but we see definitely strong increase in uptake in the volume of AI publishing. So definitely AI is starting to find its way into music. And you know, like in other fields, this is, you know, nuclear physicists think it's going to completely reinvent and has given a new lease on life of this idea of electricity generation from nuclear fusion. But likewise with music, AI could be at the heart of some really new innovative shifts in how music is made, how it is consumed, how you understand it. And I think this is happening across all fields of research. When we did this work on the impact of artificial intelligence on science and knowledge discovery, it goes from one end is it's going to be useful, enabling, it's going to help people do things faster, better, more productively, right to the other end of it's transformative. It really fundamentally changes how we think about research. It changes how physicists think. It changes how linguists start to analyze and understand language because they've got these tools of natural language processing. And it could be that it changes how musicians create, understand, and analyze and look at music and human interaction with music. I'll probably a whole bunch of other applications there too. The human dimension. My team wrote the ethics framework on artificial intelligence, which is now a set of principles on the Australian government website. They may find their way into legislation. I think the Medibank and other, and you know, Optus, and I shouldn't just call it all of the data breaches that we've seen, which are very high profile, are starting to push us towards data governance framework, and really AI ethics is data ethics. The sort of frameworks and legislation that exist in Europe probably will start to come here, where things like explainability might be a legal requirement. If a piece of AI makes a decision that really impacts you in your life, it's got to be explainable, it's got to be transparent, it's got to be contestable. And I think what we thought were voluntary principles may sort of start to have regulatory presence, and legislation may follow. There's also this really important human dimension to delivering all this digital technology. A paper published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, which is one of the top journals. We nickname it Passed by Nature and Science, but that puts it at 3. It says skills discrepancies between research, education, and jobs reveal the critical need to supply soft skills for the data economy. That's the title of the paper. And these researchers looked at oodles of data about skills, employment, what the education system was producing, what industry was consuming, and say, and I'm quoting them here, finally, we reveal the increasing importance of uniquely human skills, soft skills, communication, emotional intelligence, the ability to understand how someone is feeling at the other end of all of this tech and how it's affecting their psychology and mood. Now, these skills are currently undersupplied, bottom line. And I think we can see this actually within the tech corporations. I mean, there's one big tech corporation in America which is currently getting sunk by its owner for no clear reason, but most of the ones that are trying to, grow and do stuff are really looking towards these sorts of skills to be able to expand and do what they're doing. And I found this is a TED talk that I shared with Diana actually, and if you Google Eric Berridge TEDx on why the tech sector needs the humanities and the arts, he gives a really he's an English major who got a job at IBM and then created this spin-off company, Blue Wolf, which is a full-on software engineering company. And he tells an interesting story of how they were about to get sacked by their customer for not being able to deliver what the customer needed, a software product. And they were at a bar talking about it, and this young guy, I'm going to forget, it was Jed or James, Jeff, it was Jeff, that's right. Jeff was a bartender who was a philosophy major at Princeton, but they were just telling him about the problem. And by the end of the night, they decided to give him a run, and they put him in the room with the client, and he had a discussion with them, and they said it completely changed the conversation from how they were building it to what and why they were building. And then they figured out what it was they were meant to be doing, and the whole thing, relationship with the client changed, and they say they came out of it with an extra $200 million for the company, which became very successful. So it's an incredible story. But I love the way he argues it, and I see this need. And he then says, and while we still sort out computer engineers, we sprinkled in artists, musicians, writers. Our CTO is an English major like himself, but they filled the company with this sort of capability. And I see this, having worked in the tech sector a lot, I see very strong technical skills, but rooms of people who cannot connect and can't handle the why, the what, and the how's it going to actually make someone feel at the other end, because these technologies are being used by people, vulnerable people, teenagers, kids, but all people. And the appreciation of that emotional response ain't necessarily really there. And I think that will be not just an important thing to do, it'll be a really important commercial driver for tech firms and technology products. In the environment we're in too, we have this big distrust hurdle because of all this misinformation and malinformation you get on a regular basis that is trying to trick you on clicking a link or doing something or misleading you. And it seems like the use of misinformation within certain political spheres has just increased so much that it's become almost the norm compared to what it might be. It's created this distrust era where it's hard, very hard, even if you have accurate, reliable, truthful, and helpful information, it's very hard for you to just enter the conversation because of all the false information that's been spread. Lastly, innovation is kind of at the core for a lot of what we want to do with music. Innovation with AI and digital, but thinking about the role of music in this space, all sorts of important innovations. Clayton Christensen, who studied the question of innovation at Harvard, said, companies, organizations are genetically engineered to kill off the innovation that's going to save them, because 9 times out of 10, the new idea doesn't work. It's the 10th time it might have been the thing that saved a company like Eastman Kodak in the digital revolution. And that's where innovation and is needed, and innovation and new ideas come from the edge primarily. So that's a look into the future from our 7 megatrends over the coming 10 to 20 years. I hope it was useful, not too disturbing, but there is opportunity amongst this as well. Thank you very much.